Hi Mary, my name is Thea Evans and I'm the pollinator garden coordinator at the Bee Lab here at the University of Minnesota. And my job is to manage the maintenance of the pollinator garden and make sure that we're doing everything that we can to provide the best habitat for bees, both for their health and for their diversity. This garden was planted in 2016, so right after this building was built. I probably spend 4 or 5 hours a week in here weeding. We have weeds like thistles and I weed those out. I spend a certain amount of time trimming back plants from the edges where they tend to want to flop over into the pathways. And then we also have a natural areas gardener who works with the land care, and I coordinate with him. He'll come through and do things like weed whack around the shrubs and mow the lawn areas. So we kind of work together to make sure that everything is doing well.
Do you have both native and non-native plants in this planting?
So this is a native plant garden, and all of the plants that are in here are plants that are native to Minnesota. And we have those because it really provides the best habitat for the native bees of Minnesota. We have about 500 species of bees that live here in Minnesota, best adapted to the native plants that they've evolved with here. I think it's over 100 different species of native plants that grow here in this garden.
Do the bees have a preference for single flowers versus double flowers?
Yeah, that's a great question. Double flowers have been bred to have all those kind of extra petals. They look, really beautiful to us, but often those extra petals are actually the reproductive parts of the plant that have been bred to be petals instead. They often don't produce any nectar or pollen, and so they don't really provide anything for the bees at all. That's another reason to choose native plants or plants that haven't been highly bred like that will still be providing the food that the bees need to eat.
Well, here in the city, how do the bees find food?
There are many places and ways that bees find food. So many trees and shrubs provide food for bees, especially in the springtime when there aren't a lot of other plants blooming. All those, the boulevard trees and the trees in people's yards can often provide a lot of resources for bees. And then lots of people have gardens in their yards. So if you're walking around in your neighborhood or if you look in your own yard, you may just sort of notice which plants seem to be attracting bees to them. And then also, a lot of people here in the city are choosing to not use herbicides on their lawn and let some of the flowering plants that grow in lawns actually bloom. So plants like clover, dandelions, there are a whole bunch of different little plants that will grow in the lawns, and those also provide food for bees.
Thea, what do you do with this in the fall?
So in the fall, we really just let all of these plants stay standing in the fall and over the winter. And the seeds from the flowers provide food for birds. It provides overwintering habitat for bees and other insects. And so we just let it kind of be tall in the wintertime. And then in the spring, kind of before a lot of plants start to grow, we'll cut back everything to, between 8 and 18 inches. And we'll leave those cut stems from the previous year to be nesting habitat for bees that will actually nest in those plant stems.
Would you be willing to show me some of the beautiful plants blooming here that are great for the bees?
Yes, I'd love to. Let's go take a look. So this is a rain garden that we've planted to catch water off of this building. And when it's raining, the water really comes fast off of this building. And so in this depression in the land here, we've planted a bunch of plants that will do well with that kind of intermittent flooding and then drying out between rains. And I'm so glad that you're here while the wild bee balm is blooming. This is one of my favorite plants, and the bees absolutely love it, especially bumblebees. And it's a really important plant for bumblebees. It's actually been shown to have immune enhancing properties and helps them fight off diseases. Another plant that we have in this area is Culver's root that's blooming now. These are the midsummer blooming plants. It's a really cool plant because it'll do well in a lot of different conditions. So you can actually plant this in part shade, but it also does well in full sun. It has these really cool spires of white flowers. Bumblebees actually really love this one as well, but we also see a lot of honeybees on them. You can see some honeybees.
Thea, there's lots of things blooming here, but you've got grasses too.
Yeah, so grasses are also important for pollinators. They're wind pollinated plants, so bees don't visit them for pollen or nectar, but they provide habitat for the bees in other ways. So they grow really well with the other prairie plants that we have planted in here. Because they're bunch grasses, they kind of provide a place where bees that nest in the ground can access the soil surface around them. So they help to provide nesting habitat for bees, which is also really important for their protection and conservation. We also have this tall plant right here. This is a really cool plant. It's kind of a lesser known garden plant. This is called late flowering figwort. And there's also an early flowering figwort, which blooms in June. We have some of that in the garden as well. The flowers are not very conspicuous. They're pretty small, but they produce a ton of nectar and the bees really love them. Over here we have Virginia mountain mint. This one is one that honeybees absolutely adore. It's in the mint family, so kind of similar to Monarda, which is also in the mint family. It has some of those immune enhancing properties for bees.
We're in the summer and you have beautiful plants, but what about some for the other seasons?
Yeah, so it's so important for pollinators to have plants that are blooming at all times of the growing season. So starting in the very early spring and going all through the summer and into the fall. And we have lots of plants that bloom here in the spring. Trees and shrubs can be really important for pollinators in the early spring. So we have trees like red maple. We have shrubs like prairie willow, which is one of the very first things to bloom, and you'll just see that covered with honeybees when that's blooming. And then there's a plant called golden alexanders, which we have in the front of the garden, and it's a prairie plant. It's, sort of a medium height plant. It has yellow flowers, it's in the carrot family, and it attracts so many different kinds of bees. It's one that researchers have found attracts the most species of bees to it. So when it's blooming, it blooms in the late spring and kind of in that bridge season going from spring to summer when there aren't a lot of other plants blooming often. So it's a really important plant for pollinators. We also have some areas in the garden where we have prairie smoke planted. That's another very low growing prairie plant that blooms first thing in the spring, and that one is pollinated by bumblebees actually. So queen bumblebees, when they're coming out of hibernation, they'll visit the prairie smoke plants and they use buzz pollination to pollinate it. And then in fall, the kind of backbone, I would say, of the native plant garden in the fall are asters and goldenrods. We have numerous kinds of asters that grow in this garden. New England aster is one of them, which is just gorgeous in the fall. You get those beautiful dark purple flowers. But we also have at least 4 or 5 other species of asters that grow in the garden as well. And then we have a bunch of different types of goldenrods also. So another way that we provide nesting habitat for bees in this garden is by planting plants that leafcutter bees will use to they'll cut pieces of leaves out of certain plants and use them to line the inside of their nests. So we have a sculpture in the garden it's a stone sculpture and it has holes drilled in it, and the bees nest in those holes, and they cut the leaves of the plants, the roses, and there's some low-bush honeysuckle that they really seem to like the leaves of. They'll cut little pieces out of those leaves and use them to line the inside of the nests in those holes. So it's just really important to have that full coverage of flowers blooming throughout the season here in the garden.